Hey y'all, welcome to your last home group before spring break. I hope that you're enjoying your time together so far tonight, maybe having a good meal, having some fun snacks, whatever it is. I've got a few announcements for you as we get close to spring break. The first one of those is last week we announced a new event from June 1st through June 4th that's going to teach us some leadership and also be a chance for us to get away and really talk about what do we want our youth ministry to be like? How are we going to reach our friends? What are some things that we want to do next school year in youth ministry? We're going to plan a fall retreat. We're going to plan a new retreat. We're going to talk about missions and all those things. And that trip is called Navigate. We're going up to Northwest Arkansas, where we'll be in the mountains up there, and we're going to do some kayaking. We're going to stay in a cabin. We're going to cook together and really come together and do a special thing for our youth ministry. We can only take 8 guys and 8 girls, and so there's an application at the link on the screen that you can go to. It's also the link tree that's in our Instagram bio or on the website. And we want you to apply. We want you to fill those slots. There's a lot of you that we want to be able to take 6th grade through 11th grade, so we can do a really special thing and really buy into what we do and invest in it. So click that link, fill out your application quick so that way we can get a move on that. The other thing is that March 13th and March 20th, we will not have the Loft Live or the Loft Home Groups. We'll take those 2 Sundays off for spring break, and so March 6th will be our last Loft Live session. We'll finish up our House Divided series and then take a little break before we launch into the back half of the quarter. And so, man, we hope that you enjoyed tonight. We're going to dive into session 2 of House Divided, looking in 1 Corinthians and see what it says for us. We love you guys, and we're excited for what's coming tonight. All right, hey y'all, welcome to House Divided Session 2. If you've got your Bibles open with you, or maybe you opened them up earlier in your conversation leading up to this, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 tonight, and we'll be getting into it in a little bit. But as we kind of jump, right, we were in chapter 1 last week, we're going all the way into chapter 12. We're going to look at this thing that the Corinthian church is really divided up over. And it reminded me of when I was in high school, and I had a friend named Bryce. Now, Bryce was your typical, like Enneagram 7, always just wants to have fun, full of energy. Everything is like, if he can't have fun, he doesn't want to be there. He's the one that was always usually getting us into trouble, like always trying to get us to do a different thing. But he was also a really good teammate. And so Bryce ran track and cross country with us and with all of our friends. I had known Bryce since we were kids. He played soccer with us. He was what I like to call rec league athletic or youth ministry athletic, meaning that anytime you played a tournament or a game, you were going to pick him probably at the top of the list, but he wasn't exactly signing scholarships anywhere. Like, he was just kind of good enough to get by and do a thing in almost any circle of people that he was in. And that kind of even applied to running. Like, he was good and he could be good, but he didn't really care enough about it to spend a lot of time on it. And so on our team, Bryce was about just like almost good enough to be on varsity. He was never going to race varsity. He was never going to be in a race with us. But he was on the top end of JV, and he was an alternate whenever we traveled. And so from the outside looking in, you could kind of look and go, like Bryce is kind of important, but he's not really important. He's not the fastest guy on the team. He's not signing these D1 scholarships. That's not who he is. He doesn't really contribute. But everybody on our team actually knew something different. And so what would happen is that we'd walk into a cross-country meet, which if you've ever been to one, it's just a very weird thing. You just kind of walk into an open park, and there's all these clusters of people under tents hanging out and doing a thing. And Bryce had this super obnoxious giant blue flag with a G on it. And he would walk it into the meet and wave it all over the place as if we had just landed on the moon and just be super obnoxious. Like, everyone knew when we rolled up to a place. And then not only that, Bryce, he would race JV, but then afterwards, he would always go to the starting line with the varsity guys, and he would bring all of our bags with us, with our shoes, and then he would take our sweats for us, and he would fill up those bags, and he would carry all the bags from the starting line. Like, it was like having our own personal, just like buddy that would walk with us and pick up our stuff. And then Bryce would be super obnoxious, so he would get his really big blue flag, and when everybody was lining up on the starting line, Bryce would run up and down the starting line until they kicked him off, yelling and screaming, and people hated it, but we loved it. It got us so excited to race every single weekend. and it really contributed to the energy and the environment and the culture of what we did. Bryce was about a year older than me, and what we found out is when he graduated and I was a senior and we had a really good team, we really missed Bryce. Like, we would just walk into meets normally. Like, no one really took up the mantle of obnoxious heckler of other teams. And so we realized very quick, like, he was important to the locker room. He took care of us. He was like one of our good friends. He contributed to the culture. He was a ton of fun to be around, and he made it really exciting to race every weekend. Now, to other people that may have looked, they may have thought like, oh, Bryce is just a friend and he doesn't really matter. But for all of us that were a part of it, we knew that he contributed greatly to the cause of what we do. And that's really the question that we want to answer today, is the question of mattering. What do I matter? What do you matter? When you come up into the loft, when you're a part of the church, do you matter to what we do here? Are you a part of what we do here, either at the loft or at the church as a whole? Because sometimes we can convince ourselves that we're just coming in and we're sitting and we're hearing and we're leaving. We're coming in, we're sitting, and we're hearing and we're leaving. And that's the only role that we play, and that there are some people who are super important, and maybe they're speakers or they're communicators or they're involved in all of the leadership intricacies, or maybe they work in the sound booth, or they have a very specific place that they live. But because maybe you don't have a specific talent that contributes in that way, you don't find yourself important. Or sometimes we just ask ourselves the question, what is in it for me? But in the question of mattering, we ask the question of, what can I do to contribute here? And in this huge debate, that's actually what we walk into in this 1 Corinthians context. They're actually having a fight over something called speaking in tongues, which looks very different today than it even did then. But it was basically what happened in the beginning of Acts, is the apostles spoke in tongues and then everybody heard as they understood, is what the text says. And then the early churches would kind of move from that, and in order to rise in the ranks of their church and attain status in their church, they would speak in tongues. But the problem is there was nobody that understood what was going on. They were just trying to pretend like they were the apostles and had the authority of the apostles and the status of the apostles. And so there's this debate of what gifts are more important than others, and can you get status by the gifts that you have? And again, we live in that world. Like, we may walk into the loft and feel like there are other students who have more status based off of what they can do, because they can be on stage and play worship, because they're comfortable speaking out loud or teaching in settings, or because they serve in a very specific role. And we can kind of begin to build our own hierarchy. And that happens in Corinth, and Paul begins to address it and really helps them out. And I want to say, too, we're actually going to find something out today, and we'll see it in some of the wording. Sometimes when we talk about this passage, we just talk about spiritual gifts, and that we all have this spiritual gift, that we have to find out what it is, and where it belongs, and how we use it. But Paul actually speaks to something bigger than just these spiritual gifts that are out there that we don't know about. He actually even just speaks to the works that are being done in the church, and the serving that's being done in the church, and the tangible things that people bring to the table. Some translations, you may even see a little mark in your Bible. It doesn't just say spiritual gifts, it says spiritual ones. And so Paul is speaking less to the gift and more to the people who know Jesus and the things that they do for the church and for the body of Christ. And so if we open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, my headline says diversity of spiritual gifts, and in that first verse it says now concerning spiritual gifts. Sometimes there's a note and it says now concerning spiritual ones, which is probably, I think, the better way to read this. He's come out of this whole speech and now he's transitioning into a new space. And in verse 1 it says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, remember that family language that we talked about last week, I do not want you to be unaware. You know that when you were pagans, pagans is just a word that means they didn't know Jesus. They were not a part of the church. They were not saved. It's not a language that we use a lot. A language that we might use is like unchurched or not a Christian or non-believer. You know that when you were pagans, you used to be enticed and led astray by mute idols. And therefore, I want you to know that no one speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus is cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. Now, there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different ministries, but the same Lord. And there are different activities, but the same God produces each gift in each person. A manifestation of the Spirit is given to each person for the common good. To one is given a message of wisdom through the Spirit, to another a message of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the one Spirit, To another, the performing of miracles, and to another, prophecy, and to another, distinguishing between spirits, and to another, different kinds of tongues, and to another, interpretation of tongues. One and the same Spirit is active in all these, distributing to each person as He wills. Now, it's really important. What we want to identify first is that this is not a complete list of spiritual gifts. Paul actually uses a different list in other books, and even that isn't a complete list. Paul is speaking to some of the gifts and the things that they're arguing about with where they're at. And now we notice Paul doesn't just say gifts, he says ministries and activities, the things that they do or the acts of service or the things that take place. The greater message that Paul wants to communicate is this: if we continue to be divided, we will miss out on each other's gifts. We will miss out on our contribution to the greater whole, which is our role within the church. Next week, we're going to talk about the passage right after this that talks about this body analogy that Paul gives and what that means. But he tells them very plainly, your gifts are to contribute to the common good. And so the thing that you're good at, the thing that you can do, is not to build yourself up, it's to build the whole group of people up. And so we have to be diligent to look at what are the things that I'm good at, and how can they be good for the church? And I want you to begin to think and to stretch your mind and not just think, what is the typical list of spiritual gifts and where does that work in? Right? In our church, there are people who have knowledge of technology and understand how technology works and are good with it, and they can see things differently than other people can see. Now, Paul doesn't ever list the use of technology or being able to use that as a spiritual gift in his lists. But for sure, people who are good at that have a place in our church to contribute to build up the body so we can make cool stuff, even like this video that we're watching in home groups. There are people that you may be an artist, you may be good with pen and paper, you may be a good writer, to begin to figure out if this is a thing that I'm good at, how does it contribute to the greater good of the body? You may be sitting there and think, man, I'm a really great athlete. And the question is, how does being a great athlete contribute to the greater good of the body? We have to begin to identify what we are good at. And how will it make us better at the Loft? And how will it make us better at First Baptist? How can it contribute? Right? Even if you're just sitting there and you're like, man, I don't have a ton of these tangible talents that we look at, but I'm a really good friend. Man, being a good friend, being kind to people, being able to identify strangers and spark up a conversation, that is a gift that contributes to the body, and it helps people when they come into our building and they don't know anybody, that you're the one who goes and talks to them, that you're the one who makes them feel at home. That is a gift, and it contributes. And debatably, it's better and more important than even my gift. And it's more important than even the gift of those who are musically talented and can be on stage. That just because there are people that have gifts that can be on stage, there are other people that have gifts that are so much more important because they contribute in the silence and in the quiet and to the greater good of the body and never obtain status at all. And that's even Paul's point too. He's going to make a point later on, we're going to talk about it some next week, that sometimes because some of us may have more identifiable gifts, we can think that we are more important and that we don't need the others. But the reality is we all need each other to contribute and to be a part of the body. Which means that for some of us who just stop coming or aren't here anymore because things have changed or things look different or so-and-so isn't here or it's not exactly like I want it to be, you're removing yourself and stealing from us your gift that contributes to the body. Like, we need you. It's not just that we're not sitting here and go, you need us, you need the church. No, we need you. Now, if we haven't figured out how we need you and what you can do, then we need to figure that out. But let's have that conversation. Let's have that conversation tonight so we can figure out how to contribute. I remember when I was in the church that I was at before this, and I had a student that he was super quiet. And he was great in the sound booth, so I really appreciated him because there was only so many people that could work in my sound booth, and he never missed a Wednesday night. He always ran the booth. He ran my camera, he ran lights, and he ran sound all by himself. I mean, he was just the super cool kid, but he was always quiet, always had his AirPods in, didn't really talk to a lot of people, but never missed a Wednesday and never missed a Sunday morning. As a matter of fact, the group that he was in on Sunday morning, the teachers would give them free Chicken Express for every quarter that they didn't miss. And so he was just racking up free chicken. I mean, it was impressive. And one day on Instagram, he didn't have a lot of followers, but he talked about his SoundCloud. And my associate and I were like, what? Samuel has a SoundCloud? Look, let's go check this out. So we go and we find his SoundCloud and we start listening, and he was making EDM music and doing some producing and DJing, and as we started to listen, we were like, oh my gosh, this nerdy little kid from small town Texas is super talented. At the time, we had a weekend called 180 Weekend that would be like our version. We do fall retreat, they would do that. And we were always trying to think of a big way to launch the weekend, to get kids excited so that way they would be focused in so we could deliver truths. And so we did a different thing every year, and we were racking our brains, what are we going to do this year? How are we going to make it bigger? How are we going to make it better? And I reached out to Samuel and I was like, hey, here's what I want to do. Can you make a song that's all yours, that's original, that's for 180 Weekend, and I want you to be able to perform it live on stage, and we're going to light it up, and you are going to DJ the countdown and the intro into 180 Weekend. And Samuel messages back, and he's like, I'm all in. Let's do this thing. So we're like waiting weeks ahead of time, and we're just getting so excited, because even there's kids in our youth ministry that they didn't even know who Samuel was. They had never heard from him. And Samuel gets on stage, and I'm actually out of the room talking with some adults. We cue the countdown goes up, and Samuel just starts playing a song and DJing, and he's hitting his pads, and lights are going everywhere, and it's super cool. And all of a sudden, you just hear 150 teenagers yelling at the top of their lungs, Samuel, 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 but just a bunch of little white kids with their hands in the air acting like they're at some EDM festival they've never been to or anything like that. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is the coolest moment ever. And thinking about it, there was no place for him, right? He contributed in the sound booth, he did the things that we asked him to do, but in the thing that he loved, he had never found a place to use it. And for one moment, we gave him a place to do it. And even though it looked like it was all about him, it wasn't about him at all. Those moments would get kids focused in so they would pay attention to what happens on stage, so they had a good attitude. And when they walk into a space and had fun, they were able to listen to the truth. And that weekend, out of all weekends that I've ever served in youth ministry ever, I saw more kids accept Christ. We baptized more kids afterwards than any other weekend. Now, I don't know if that's exactly because of Samuel, but I do know that he contributed. I know that he was part of it. I know that he sees that weekend as someone who made it happen and was part of it. We took his gift and we figured out, how does it contribute to the whole? How does it make us better? And that weekend, he made us better. And so, man, even if you have this really niche gift or this really weird thing that you do, man, begin to find a place. How do you contribute up here? How do you belong here? Maybe you're just a good friend. Maybe you're a good speaker. Maybe you have a good story. Maybe you're great in the sound booth. Maybe you have some ideas. Maybe you're an artist. Whatever it is, begin to figure out what is something that you can do and contribute. See, if we're divided, we'll miss out on each other, and then we'll even just choose to pull ourselves from the body because we don't actually contribute there anyway. But if we learn our gifts and we think about them, we can find a place to use them, and now we begin to belong. Let us not be a house divided that misses out on each other's giftings, because when we use each other's giftings, when we see each other's giftings, we're built up, and our city wins. Y'all have a great night, and figure out, man, how are we going to come together with our gifts? Love you guys. We'll see you next week.